But what has replaced that is the self-ideology and the self-importance of what I want. People have entered marriage incorrectly, thinking it's about them and their happiness. So when people are even planning an engagement, they're not planning an engagement with God in mind, who created it. They're planning their own ideas, their own thoughts, their own desires, their own plans to have a ceremony that looks good to the world. And the world don't care nothing about marriage. We've seen that. There's been a breakdown of marriage, and there's really been a breakdown of traditional marriages. So with a breakdown of that, and with self-importance ruling, that is what you get in the church now. That is why in the church in general, the Black church in particular, you see a lot of families leaving. There are three types of families that are at a church. There's a older family with high school, college age kids. There's single mamas with 1, 2, 3, 4 kids. And then there are other people, young families that are leaving. Those are the families. And if you want me to add a fourth, it is grandma, mama, auntie, daughter. They all go to brunch after service. The man has been removed, and the man has been escaped, and the pastor takes the place of the man, because the pastor's word is what those women in the final group go talk about all week.
I saw
Not what God said, not what Jesus said in the word. It's like, oh, my pastor said this today. Oh, it was so good. Too many preachers right now want to be clippable. They want to be on X, they want to be on YouTube, and they want to have a nice clip that goes out and goes on fire. The pastors that I follow, that I see that are really out here doing God's work, they ain't worried about being on social media. They ain't worried about getting canceled. They ain't worried about triggering and hurting your feelings, because Jesus did not come to worry about hurting your feelings. He came to change the way that everything was done in the world. He died as our savior. So if he ain't worried about it, and pastors are not worried about it, this is why churches are attracting what they're attracting.
I think, to counter what you said a little bit, I think it went from the two people and the religion in the center, like you mentioned. I think
Mm-hmm.
religion has been replaced by the government, and the government or the state has
Mm-hmm.
promoted what you said, the self importance and the self ideology, especially when you see it now, because there's basically three levels of union. There's marriage, there's ceremony, city hall, things like that, and then you have common law. To me, the common law
Mm-hmm.
was always people who weren't necessarily very religious. That was their outlet. Because
Mm-hmm.
ideally, someone who's very religious wouldn't go common law unless circumstances or finances prevented that they were living together and they ultimately got married. But they
Mm-hmm.
would ultimately get married in the short term. It wouldn't be they were living together for 10 years. And then, hey, you think about getting married, it wouldn't be something that's on the back burner. But one thing I also want to highlight that you mentioned is you have people, specifically men in the Black church, leaving.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember seeing a sermon where the pastor, he did a fantastic job. I forget his name, but he did a fantastic job. He said, "Will all the single women stand up?" And they all stood
Mm.
up. And then he said, "Will all the single men stand up?" And they stood up. And he said, "Ladies, they're your future husbands." The strange thing about that was the women outnumbered the men,
Yeah.
right?
So the
So
women are outnumbering men in most spaces like that. So in community impact spaces, and I think here's the downside to it. So if you are a man who's a heterosexual Christian, God-fearing, loving man who is single, you if you wanted to do what we do and what we talk about at TMG Book Series, and find you a modern woman, a traditional woman, or a high value woman, you're gonna find her at church. Because if she is not, and she's a city girl, she's only going to be there every other week. If she's a female, she's only going to be there when her emotions allow her to be there. So when you start going into spaces and moving into spaces, you're going to have no choice. You're going to run into women. This is what I talk about when I say the 6 month rule is when you're someone as a man, and I'll talk to the men in particular. and you're like, I want to get a better relationship outcome. You put your head down. One of the things I say is go find religion. I say go find Jesus. You go to church in 6 months. Once you get there and join, they're gonna put you in stuff. They're gonna be calling you, and then everybody's gonna see it, and you're gonna have people having conversations about you that you have no idea are having conversations about you. Single men, and then you're gonna look up, and somebody's finally gonna be bold enough to come step to you. You've done the work for the previous 6 months. So now you know I'm not about to fall for the foolishness. You'll be able to hear if she is a city girl, hear if she's a gal, hear if she's a female, and that's where you cut them off. Don't do what the world says do, just smash and dash. That's why a lot of women in those three groups are frustrated with the market, the dating market, because they're getting modern men, traditional men, and in some instances, high value men to give them attention, but not intention. This is happening in the church too. These women who come in and they meet a guy who's single, they are like, oh, it's great. God talked about it. They slip up, and then the guy moves on. It's not, the church ain't exempt. The church has its faults.